Demarcus Hale raised his hand in AP Calculus, and the whole class laughed. Not because he was wrong, but because he was black. Even the teacher smirked. But 2 minutes later the room went silent. The equation was solved, the method was flawless, and no one could explain how he did it, except one silent man in the back, who'd been watching the whole time, and worked for Harvard. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Demarcus Hale sat rigid in the back row of Mrs. Pennington's third period calculus class, hands folded over his notebook. The hum of quiet chatter surrounded him. The smell of chalk dust and stale air filled the room. From the front, the whiteboard glowed with formulae and derivatives. But for Demarcus it was less a barrier and more a beckoning challenge. He was 17 years old, tall and lean, with dark skin that made him nearly vanish in some corners of Westwood Preparatory's halls. A place where paling walls, mahogany desks and the soft gleam of polished floors spoke of centuries of tradition rooted in exclusion. He had always been the smartest person in the room. Inside his mind, equations unfolded like maps, integrals, limits, differential equations. They danced before him with clarity. But outside, no one treated him like someone who belonged. Teachers rarely called his name. Classmates whispered that he couldn't have got in on merit. He moved through halls as though he were passing through glass, never quite touching the fabric of belonging. His scholarship was often spoken of as a favor, his accomplishments suspected of being inflated. That morning, Mrs. Pennington announced a new problem, a complex integrative proof, combining multivariable calculus with a piecewise function twist. She projected it, pointed at each term, and challenged the class. Within 10 minutes, solve it. A hush fell. The more confident students scribbled nervously. Preston, seated 3 rows ahead, looked up with a smug certainty in his eyes, flipping his pen. Emily to his left bit her lip. Demarcus's heart thudded softly in his chest. He knew this problem. It was dense, and that made it a perfect test. His fingers curled over the pen, ready. He glanced at the eyes in the room. For once, he wanted them on him, but no one offered the signal. The quiet continued, punctuated by the scratching of pencils and the shifting of chairs. Minutes passed. 2 students handed in blank sheets. Preston frowned. Emily's pencil snapped. Mrs. Pennington walked past desks, leaning in to inspect those she expected might succeed. She paused at one station, smiled, then moved on. She didn't look at Demarcus. Demarcus swallowed. The cursor in his brain slid through derivative rules, constraint combinations, piecewise continuity. He felt the thrill of momentum. With careful calm, he raised his hand. The gesture was subtle, almost sheepish, palm slightly open, wrist loose. In the silence it was as if he were asking permission to speak in a church where he had never been invited. At once the room snapped into awareness. Laughter bubbled from desks near him, quiet at first, then louder. "Did he just raise his hand?" whispered one voice. "He can't even show his work properly," murmured another. Preston glanced back, brow arched. Emily bit her lip in uncertain guilt. Mrs. Pennington's head flicked, and she met his eye, only briefly, then looked away. The laughter grew, a ripple through the room, and Demarcus's stomach clenched, humiliation burning. He had expected resistance but not this open mockery in front of his peers. He lowered his hand. The echo of a snicker followed him. He looked down at his notebook, heart thudding, mind racing. He could silently complete the proof. He could abandon the attempt. Either way, this moment felt pivotal, either affirmation or erasure. Something inside him hardened. He tilted his notebook toward the board and stood. The class gasped. Mrs. Pennington rose too, purse tightening in her hand, something in her face like surprise or frustration. The silence was immediate, dense, like a held breath. Demarcus stepped forward. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. He went to the board. The entire room followed, drawn by the tension, by shock, by whatever magnet had pulled all eyes to the back row. The chalk felt cool in his grasp. He turned, faced the class. From behind him the equations stared back, waiting. Hands shifted. Emily rose from her seat. Preston stared. Mrs. Pennington froze in mid-stride. Demarcus began to erase a portion of the board. One segment so he could build his proof fresh from his own conceptual frame. In his mind each step glowed in order. Transform the piecewise function across subdomains. Apply the gradient constraints. Integrate under boundary conditions. As he wrote, he narrated quietly, carefully, so that every student could see. We subdivide region A and region B, then shift the parameter via substitution, then integrate the derivative of the combined constraints. His voice was soft but firm. He didn't shout. He didn't ask permission now. He was not speaking as someone begging to be heard. He was speaking as someone who already knew. Laughter stopped. Whispers ceased. Preston's pen dropped. Emily leaned forward. Mrs. Pennington's jaw constricted. The board filled with symbols, drawn lines, limits, and the final result, a neat, elegant proof. The clock behind them ticked. The ending piece, a final simplification, appeared in Jamarcus's hand. He flipped it. He stepped back. The room was quiet. He felt his skin press against air. He met Mrs. Pennington's eyes. Her lips parted, but no word came. The student stared at the board, jaws slack. His proof was correct, flawless. But the shock in the room was heavier than triumph could be. He had shattered their expectation. The walls of mockery had cracked, exposing something raw, something dangerous to the silence. Mrs. Pennington cleared her throat finally. Her voice trembled. Mr. Hale, you solved it? Jamarcus nodded. No pride, only steadiness. Show your work, she demanded. Though some parts were already visible, he handed over the notebook to her, and she flipped through pages. She hesitated at some steps. Some she never taught, some she never considered. His classmates shifted uneasily. Preston opened his mouth, then shut it. No one applauded. Emily's eyes glistened. Mrs. Pennington closed the notebook. She swallowed hard, glancing at the board, at the students, at Jamarcus. Her voice came again, more composed. Well, I suppose I'll need some time to review this. She turned away. She walked off the stage, the board without acknowledgement. Jamarcus returned to his seat. His hands trembled slightly, goosebumps on his arms. He exhaled as though he had held his breath for hours. But around him, the students were silent in a new tension. A slow reckoning. The room had tilted. The laughter had stopped, just like that, but a hollowness remained. He sat, a dozen eyes lingered on him. On the board. Some in wonder, some in confusion, some in guilt. He looked at Preston. Preston stared at the floor. Emily's chin quivered. Mrs. Pennington's back was turned. Time passed. The teacher moved on to new topics, but the proof remained in its place, a monument to something no one had seen coming, something unignorable. Jamarcus closed his notebook. In that small motion, something settled inside him. He would not be silent again. He would be heard, or he would break trying. Outside the classroom, the corridor was empty. But in that empty space, a figure waited behind the door. Dr. Eli Spencer, the Harvard admissions representative. Notebook in hand, eyes fixed on Jamarcus's retreating form, unexpectedly quietly having stepped in during the lecture. No one expected what would happen 120 seconds later, when the board lit up with the truth. The classroom door clicked shut. As Mrs. Pennington strode to the front, chalk in hand, and a stack of colored markers to her side, the morning light slanted across the whiteboard, casting long shadows over calculus symbols she had drawn in sharp black. The room smelled faintly of erasers and stale coffee. Jamarcus Hale sat near the back, notebook open, fingers curled over the pen, watching her move. In that moment, the tension in the air felt like charged dust, waiting to settle or explode. From the beginning of the semester, Mrs. Pennington's pattern was clear. When she asked a question, she scanned certain faces. Emily, Preston, sometimes a student from honors math before she ever considered Jamarcus, even when she knew he understood deeply. If she did call on him, she often began with hesitation, as though worried she'd misguessed. Then she'd interrupt him mid-explanation. Let me rephrase that, or that's a good thought, but you must phrase it this way, steering him toward a safer path. Meanwhile, she would let others ramble, let them fumble, and still grant them more room for error. It wasn't subtle. Over weeks the gesture became visible. The head turning, the lead-in remarks, the selective praise. Whenever Jamarcus tried to push a creative method, she'd say, "That's interesting, but I want you to stick to what we did in class." Implicitly, "Your path is not welcome." He knew the curriculum inside out, but she insisted on conformity. His more elegant route would be marked wrong in her eyes, for not matching her voice. In quieter moments, he watched her posture. She carried herself like someone protecting a fragile script. The students she favored fit the mold. Tidy, incremental, safe. Preston's answers were bold, but conventional. Emily's were neat, precise. Their mistakes were forgiven, their explorations tolerated. But when Jamarcus ventured, she bristled, redirected, or withheld full recognition. That culture of favoritism festered. Students whispered, "She's tougher on him. She always cuts him off." Most of the Black scholarship students felt it. The subtle margin speech, the almost imperceptible extra correction, the dismissal masked as pedagogical rigor. Questions they asked went unanswered or redirected. Among themselves, they told stories. "I asked her a week ago, she hasn't responded. In tutoring lab, she walked by me 3 times. But in class, things escalated." On the morning of the problem, the one that would change the room's dynamic, Jamarcus was already keyed, nerves and resolve crackling inside him. He had prepared. He had thought beyond mere steps. He knew where the hidden trap lay. As soon as Miss Pennington revealed the integrative proof with piecewise constraints, he recognized the variant, the twist she hadn't warned them of. The others scribbled in confusion. Preston frowned. Emily muttered. He felt the swell in the room, the quiet panic. He raised his hand. That gesture alone broke something. Laughter erupted. Mrs. Pennington paused mid-sentence, chalk in hand, and looked at him. In that moment, the classroom split. His presence unsettled the breed of control she cultivated. Some students glared. Some looked away. The laughter did not last long, but it left a wound. Mrs. Pennington cleared her throat. The chalk's tip broke. She fumbled for a marker. Her voice held a forced calm. "Mr. Hale, do you wish to contribute?" She had tilted her head as though deliberating whether to allow it. The room held its breath. Jamarcus stood. He walked to the board. The chalk squeaked under his fingers as he erased part of the problem, reconstructing it in his own vision. With deliberate strokes, he reconstructed the subdomain, defined boundary conditions, normalized the piecewise interface, and integrated derivative paths. Students leaned forward, some mouths parted. Mrs. Pennington watched him, silent, arms crossed. After he finished, he turned back. The board glowed with his proof. No erasures visible. No indecision. The relationships among variables. The continuity arguments. The simplifications. They all sang. The room was still. "Then," Mrs. Pennington said, carefully, "your method is unorthodox. I will need to review it." Her tone was tempered, as though she offered a concession. But there was no warmth, only authority reclaiming control. She wrote "pending review" in the corner of the board. She walked away. She resumed the class as though nothing monumental happened. But everyone felt it. As the lecture moved on, a low ripple passed among students. Glances toward the board, whispering, silent judgment. Preston glanced at Jamarcus with something between envy and confusion. Emily's lips twitched, but no one applauded. No one intervened. The proof remained, in bright bold chalk visible to all. After class, students lingered. Some asked each other, "Did he just solve that? Is that even valid?" But few said it aloud to him. Jamarcus gathered his things. His heart pounded. He exited into the hallway, head down, avoiding eyes. Students parted for him with uncertainty. His fingers felt sticky, as if chalk dust still clung. In her office, Mrs. Pennington sat behind a large oak desk. Papers, protocols, grade sheets. Her forehead creased. The halls outside buzzed. She stared at the board's residue in her mind. She opened the notebook Jamarcus had handed her. She flipped pages. She paused. Some steps were unfamiliar. Intermediate substitutions, theorem associations outside the syllabus. She frowned. Then exhaling, she looked at the class roster on her desk. She made notes in red ink. Comments like evaluate rigor, ask for source, challenge unconventional solution. Her internal conflict churned. To acknowledge brilliance risked undermining her authority. To dismiss risked exposure. She closed the notebook. She leaned back, jaw tight, a file folder beside her unopened. Outside, students passed. The door to her office stood ajar. A figure stood just outside her sight. Dr. Eli Spencer, the Harvard rep, watching through the glass pane. He scribbled something in his notebook and vanished. She did not notice. Meanwhile, Jamarcus walked the halls. The quiet corridors felt heavy. As he approached the stairwell, he heard a stifled sob. He paused. Down a side hallway, someone, a black female student from another class, leaned against lockers, shoulders shaking. She looked up, tears in her eyes, and saw him. He froze. Recognition flashed. She rushed past him, heading toward the exit. Her reaction unsettled him. What was she crying over? He reached the stairs and descended 2 flights, breathing hard, chalk dust in his lungs. He turned a corner. There, in a deserted lounge area, sat a student he recognized from the scholarship program, Cedric Brooks. Cedric looked up, eyes wide. He whispered, "They found out." Jamarcus paused. "Found out what?" he asked quietly. Cedric swallowed. He said, "The chat screenshots. People sharing stuff they were talking about you. About what happened. It's leaked beyond school." Jamarcus's heart thundered. He stared at Cedric, stunned. The classroom moment was no longer confined to that room. It was spreading. He said, voice low, "How bad?" Cedric looked down. "I don't know. It's ugly. Some of them are celebrating. Others are scared." They looked at each other. The corridor lights flickered. The academic posters on the wall, formulas, Latin mottos, felt suddenly hollow. Jamarcus swallowed. He should run somewhere safe. He should hide. But momentum pulled him forward. He nodded to Cedric and left, stepping into the open hall again. Every face felt potentially hostile, potentially complicit. Back in Mrs. Pennington's classroom, the board remained, unchanged, unchallenged, unacknowledged. But there was something more. At the bottom right corner of the board, in small faint chalk, someone had scrawled 3 letters, J. No one noticed yet. The board wasn't done. Jamarcus had left behind a signature no one expected, and it was about to trigger something irreversible. The laughter had long since died, but its echo lingered, a ghost clinging to the air, uneasy, refusing to let go. It was the sound of superiority trying to disguise fear. And beneath that uneasy silence, the board glowed with something few in the room could understand. Jamarcus Hale stood beside the whiteboard, chalk still in hand, staring at what he'd written. His handwriting was steady, clean, deliberate. The faint powder dusted his fingertips like ash. The symbols curved elegantly across the surface, an entire proof condensed into motion, symmetry, and unexpected grace. It was more than correct. It was original. It was art. But the students didn't see art. They saw disruption. Preston leaned forward in his chair, squinting as if staring might expose an error. "He probably just copied something," he muttered under his breath. "No way he came up with that on his own." Emily didn't respond. Her pen was motionless above her notebook, eyes darting between the board and Jamarcus. There was a flicker of confusion in her gaze, a question forming that she didn't yet have the courage to voice. Mrs. Pennington's silence weighed heavier than anything else. She stood by her desk, her lips slightly parted, eyes locked on the equations, as if the symbols themselves had betrayed her. For years she had used this exact problem, her signature question, because no one ever solved it. It was the kind of intellectual wall meant to humble, to remind her students that mastery had limits. But Jamarcus had scaled it. His proof was built upon a theorem she vaguely remembered from graduate school, obscure, dense, often dismissed as theoretical fluff. She hadn't taught it, because it was beyond scope. Yet here it was, alive on her board, simplified with terrifying clarity. "Where did you learn this?" she asked finally. Her voice thin, like someone walking a tightrope between disbelief and something else, fear maybe. Jamarcus turned, confused. "I figured it out," he said softly. "It's just using modified divergence rules on the boundary condition. You can—" Mrs. Pennington raised a hand. "That's enough." Her tone was polite, controlled, but her eyes had gone cold. "Sit down, Mr. Hale." He hesitated, then nodded. He placed the chalk on the ledge, wiped his hand against his jeans, and returned to his seat. As he passed Preston's desk, Preston smirked. "Congrats," he whispered, leaning in. "You embarrassed her. She won't forget that." The whisper stabbed deeper than intended. Jamarcus sat down, pulse hammering in his throat. He looked around. Some classmates avoided his gaze entirely. A few exchanged looks that felt like quiet accusations. Emily kept staring at the board, brow furrowed. Something about what she saw didn't add up. Mrs. Pennington cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "Class," she began, her voice sharper now. "This demonstration is interesting. However, I'd like to remind everyone that proper methodology matters, as much as results. We don't deviate from the prescribed structure without justification." It was a dismissal dressed as instruction. Her words hung in the air, framing the brilliance as defiance. And just like that, the energy shifted. A few students nodded, relieved to be told how to feel. The collective tension diffused into something safer, condescension masquerading as order. But Emily didn't look convinced. She raised her hand slowly. "Mrs. Pennington, I think—" Later, Emily, the teacher, interrupted. "Let's move on." Emily lowered her hand, quiet, but her jaw tightened. As the class resumed, Jamarcus sat frozen. He tried to focus on the next topic, but his eyes drifted to the board where his equations still glimmered faintly under the morning light. Each symbol felt like an exposed nerve, proof of something he'd always known, but never been allowed to say out loud: that he belonged. Yet belonging was dangerous in places like Westwood. When the bell finally rang, chairs scraped against the floor. The laughter didn't return this time, but the whispers did. "He always tries too hard." She looked mad. "Guess he showed off again." Emily packed her things slowly, watching Jamarcus. "That was incredible," she whispered as he zipped his bag. "You know that, right?" He glanced at her. "Doesn't feel like it." "Give it time," she said, offering a small smile before slipping out the door. He stood alone for a moment after the room emptied. The board still displayed his proof, undeniable, permanent. For a flicker of a second, pride bloomed inside him. Then he noticed Mrs. Pennington still at her desk, pretending to grade papers but really just waiting. "Mr. Hale," she said without looking up. "Stay for a moment." He froze. "Yes, ma'am." She tapped her pen against a folder. "Once, twice." "Your approach, where did you learn it?" "Who showed it to you?" "No one," he said quietly. "I've been studying the material on my own. Some graduate papers online." "Which papers?" she pressed. He blinked. I don't remember the exact title. It was about function continuity and divergent subfields. I adapted it." "Adapted?" Her voice sharpened. "Meaning," she said, leaning forward, "you modified a source you didn't fully understand. That's dangerous, Mr. Hale. You can't just experiment with advanced material outside your level." "I didn't experiment," he replied softly. "I proved it." She looked at him for a long moment, the corners of her mouth twitching like she wanted to say something cruel, but stopped herself. Instead, she smiled thinly. "We'll discuss this further after I review your work." He nodded and left. The door closed behind him, with a click, but Mrs. Pennington didn't move. Her composure cracked. She grabbed his notebook from her desk, the one he'd turned in, and flipped through the pages again. His notes weren't copied. They were original. Every symbol flowed like thought itself. A chill ran down her spine. If the proof was valid, it meant a 17-year-old black student had just surpassed her, and that was something Westwood's hierarchy wasn't built to handle. Meanwhile, down the hall, Preston and a few others huddled near their lockers. "Can you believe that?" Preston said, shaking his head. "He just took over the board like he owned it." "Yeah, but it was kinda insane," another admitted. "I didn't even understand what he did." "Exactly," Preston said. "Probably copied it off the internet. Bet Mrs. Pennington already knows." The conversation drifted toward ridicule, comfortable and self-reinforcing. They laughed again, less cruelly this time, but still enough to twist the knife. What none of them noticed was that Emily had stopped at the classroom doorway again. She peered in through the glass, watching Mrs. Pennington's movements inside. The teacher was hunched over Jamarcus's notebook, flipping pages, frowning deeper with each turn. Emily's curiosity deepened into something else. Suspicion. She turned away and walked toward the library, heart racing. Jamarcus made his way outside, sunlight washing over the quad. The brightness felt wrong, almost artificial, after what had just happened. He walked toward the bench near the west courtyard, pulled out his phone, and opened a small notepad app filled with equations. He typed the theorem's name, the Hale divergence adjustment, a playful title he'd coined months ago, while testing ideas in solitude. He'd never told anyone about it. For a moment he smiled. But the smile faded quickly, because deep down, he knew Mrs. Pennington wasn't done with him. Inside the classroom, she picked up her phone. She dialed the main office. "Yes, this is Pennington. Could you send a copy of Mr. Hale's admission file to my inbox?" "Yes, the scholarship one. I need to review some background materials." Her tone was even, but her hand trembled slightly as she held the receiver. In the library, Emily opened her laptop, curiosity turning into quiet obsession. She searched for the theorem Jamarcus had used. trying to trace its origin. To her surprise, only a handful of graduate-level discussions existed online. Obscure, buried deep in academic forums. None of them matched his steps perfectly. He hadn't copied it. He had improved it. She stared at the screen, realization dawning. Then she remembered Preston's smug whisper. He embarrassed her. And suddenly she understood what that meant. By late afternoon, the board had been wiped clean. Mrs. Pennington herself erased it. Every trace of Giamarcus's proof vanished except for a faint smear of chalk near the corner. The only thing left, tiny, almost invisible, were 3 faint letters written low at the bottom edge. G. She didn't notice them when she left for the day. But as the last bell echoed and the janitor came to lock the room, he paused. The letters caught his eye under the fluorescent light, glowing faintly where the board hadn't been fully cleaned. He squinted, frowned, and left them untouched. 2 minutes later, the classroom door creaked open again. Someone had entered quietly, unseen. A visitor. He adjusted his tie, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the room. His gaze landed on those faint letters, and he smiled. A slow, knowing smile. He had seen everything. A visitor had entered the classroom minutes before, and he saw everything. Dr. Eli Spencer sat in the back corner of Mrs. Pennington's calculus classroom, notebook balanced on his lap. Eyes sharp. He had come to Westwood Preparatory under cover of routine campus scouting. His official schedule described observing academic culture, interviewing top prospects, meeting faculty, a benign mission. But in truth, he hoped to glimpse future scholars, hidden gems among the usual polished faces. He slipped in 10 minutes before class, found an empty chair and watched. He saw people's strong resumes, confident mannerisms, the students who expected to be seen. But he also saw something else, a system that prevented others from being seen. He watched as Mrs. Pennington called on her favored students, looked past Giamarcus, interrupted him, redirected him. He watched the subtle work of exclusion, teacher body language, students hush, the ceiling of expectation hovering over certain faces. He watched the moment laughter erupted when Giamarcus raised his hand. As Giamarcus walked to the board and erased part of the problem, Spencer leaned forward. He scribbled a note, black raised, laughed, walked up, corrected. Board silenced class. He recognized the risk. A black student daring to claim space. But he also recognized brilliance. When Giamarcus reconstructed the proof cleanly, elegantly, Spencer's pen nearly couldn't keep up. He had glimpsed proofs like that only in graduate seminars, not high school. He felt a surge of excitement. This was someone rare. But he remained quiet. His role was silent witness. He did not intervene. He did not applaud. He watched as the tension rippled through the room. Teachers' face tightening. Students caught off guard. He observed how Miss Pennington claimed control back, reminding everyone of methodology, warning of deviation, reasserting authority. He watched how Giamarcus sat down and the debate dissolved into whispers. After class, when most students fled the room, Spencer did not move. He sat still, absorbing the residue of the moment. He glanced at the board, empty, cleaned, but he knew what had been there. He tapped his pen. He made notes, names, reactions, oddities. He closed his notebook. Before exiting, he walked to Mrs. Pennington's desk, listened as she summoned Giamarcus to stay behind. He slipped out through a side door, unnoticed. Later he returned to his hotel lobby, unsettled. He opened his laptop, turned to the documents he had collected on promising high school seniors. He pulled up an application titled Giamarcus Hale. He had already flagged that file earlier. Westwood's scholarship candidates were on his radar. But until today, the file was static. Grades, test scores, recommendations. Now Spencer saw a student who had just performed validation in real time. A student whose theoretical command exceeded expectation. He drafted a note in his mind. Must meet him. Recommend strong offer. But he paused because even as he read through Giamarcus's essays, he recognized something else. Cards being stacked against him. In letters of recommendation, a phrase popped out. Though exceptional, he must prove he belongs. He frowned, the subtle doubt woven into praise. Back at Westwood, the morning after the classroom confrontation, the administration buzzed. Mrs. Pennington arrived early. In her inbox was a file, Giamarcus's scholarship application, forwarded by someone. She looked at it, brows darkening. She cross-checked the transcript, the prior grades, the recommendation letters. She paused. Then she forwarded parts of it to the principal. There was a note, need to review this carefully. She drafted another to the counseling office. Check stability, background, outside involvement. In her mind, she began engineering control. She would reassert narrative. She would mitigate damage. She would show that no one, no student, would break her classroom and go unchallenged. Meanwhile, Jamarcus walked into school, the hallways already gossiping. He saw faces turned, whispers fading. When he passed, he spotted Emily walking toward him. She slowed, uncertain. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" He nodded but didn't smile. The air was heavy. "You were amazing today," she said. He blinked. "Thank you." She looked at him, thought better of saying more, and moved on. His footsteps echoed. The weight of unseen eyes settled on him again. Later, he was summoned to the principal's office. His heart pounded as he walked the wood-paneled hallway. He entered to see the principal, Dr. Marston, flanked by Mrs. Pennington, and 2 school board representatives. Spencer's mind flicked back to this room. As a potential site of conflict, he considered stepping in, making contact, but he stayed removed. Dr. Marston closed the door behind him. She gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Jamarcus." He did. He cleared his throat. The board representative sat, arms folded. Mrs. Pennington stood. The principal spoke. "We've received concerns about your recent conduct in class. Publicly challenging authority, deviating from curriculum, possibly undermining classroom structure." He blinked. "I was just solving the problem." Mrs. Pennington leveled her gaze. "Your method was unorthodox. Students were confused. Some felt undermined. The sudden display unsettled the class." One board member interjected. "We must consider whether your actions threaten classroom order." Jamarcus felt heat rise. He crossed his hands. "I didn't threaten anything. I did the proof. It's valid." Another board member pushed. "Are you claiming it's perfect? That no mistake exists?" He paused. "I'm claiming I followed logic. If there's an error, I'll correct it. But I won't apologize for thinking." Silence fell. The room held its breath. The principal cleared her throat. "We'll review your work. For now, you are to remain under academic probation. And you'll be pulled from advanced classes until we complete the review." He stared. "You can't do that. This is punishment for being right." "Order, please," Dr. Marston said. Jamarcus stood. "I'll stand by what I proved." He turned to leave, but Mrs. Pennington said quietly, "We'll talk later." As he exited, the board representatives closed their files. The principal's face was unreadable. The door shut behind him. That afternoon, Spencer received an email alert. Conflict at Westwood. Suspended advanced placement participation pending review. Review of student file initiated by faculty. He frowned. He typed replies, drafted scheduling. He sensed urgency. He booked a flight to return earlier than planned. He wanted to intervene, or at least monitor. But before Harvard could make a move, Westwood decided to take action of its own. Westwood's board wasn't waiting. They were already drafting consequences, and Jamarcus's suspension letter was being printed as he walked the halls. 2 days later, the envelope came, thin, white, clinical. It arrived not in Jamarcus's hands, but in his mother's. The Westwood Preparatory Academy seal glared in blue ink across the top. The paper stiff with authority, she stared at it for a full minute before she tore it open with shaking fingers. The words were measured, precise, and merciless. Notice of temporary suspension. Student, Jamarcus Hale. Reason, disruptive conduct, insubordination, and behavior inconsistent with the standards of Westwood Preparatory. No mention of mathematics. No mention of achievement. No mention of brilliance. Just disruptive. The paper trembled between her fingers. Jamarcus stood across the kitchen table, still in his school hoodie, eyes wide as she read. The tiny apartment smelled of detergent and burnt coffee. Outside, car horns echoed faintly through the cracked window. His mother, Angela Hale, was a woman who carried exhaustion like invisible weight. Shoulders slightly bent, hands calloused from years of night shifts cleaning office buildings, where no one ever learned her name. She read the letter twice. Her voice cracked on the third line. "What is this?" she asked, barely more than a whisper. Jamarcus swallowed. "They said I disrupted class." "Disrupted?" She looked up sharply. "You solved their problem." He nodded. "Guess that was the problem." The silence between them thickened. Angela placed the paper on the table and sank into the nearest chair. Her knees pressed together, hands clasped tight. Baby, tell me everything. He hesitated, then recounted it all. The laughter, the silence, the bored, Mrs. Pennington's face, the meeting with the principal. As he spoke, she listened with growing disbelief, her expression hardening like cement. When he finished, she exhaled through clenched teeth. So let me get this straight. You were right, and they punished you for being right. He nodded slowly. They said I embarrassed the teacher. Angela leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, as if trying to stop herself from breaking. Embarrassed? She murmured. You think those people get embarrassed by white kids? No. They get embarrassed when someone like you proves they can't hide behind their titles. Her voice was low but steady, every word forged in years of understanding how systems bend to protect themselves. She picked up the phone and began dialing before he could protest. Mom, don't mom me, Jamarcus. They're not doing this. Within an hour, she was on the phone with Westwood's administrative office. The voice on the other end was polite, mechanical, practiced. Mrs. Hale, thank you for reaching out. The disciplinary action was determined after internal review. What review? Angela snapped. Did anyone review the fact that my son solved that problem while your teacher ignored him? Ma'am, the voice replied, clipped and defensive. Classroom decorum must be maintained regardless of academic outcome. Mr. Hale's conduct disrupted instruction. Disrupted? She repeated, fury trembling beneath her tone. He raised his hand. They laughed at him. He stood up for himself. That's what you're calling disruption. I understand your frustration, the voice said, though it was clear they didn't. You may request an appeal, but the board's decision stands until reviewed. Angela hung up without saying goodbye. That night, Jamarcus heard her crying behind the thin wall that separated his bedroom from hers. He wanted to go to her, to tell her it would be fine, but he didn't believe that himself. His laptop sat open beside him, the news still buzzing in his mind. A single thought looped endlessly. They punished me for being right. He stared at the ceiling. For years, his mother had told him, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far. He'd accepted it quietly. But now, seeing how easily they erased him, the phrase twisted into something uglier. Even twice as hard might not be enough. The next morning, they went to the school together. Angela wore her best blouse, the one she kept ironed in a plastic bag for job interviews, and her old work shoes polished clean. Jamarcus wore a pressed shirt, and his scholarship badge clipped neatly to his bag. When they arrived, the receptionist's eyes flickered, first at Angela, then at Jamarcus, then at the badge. She didn't smile. The principal will see you shortly, she said, without warmth. They waited 20 minutes. Other parents passed through the hallway, all white, all greeted with nods and soft smiles. Angela noticed every one of them. Her jaw clenched tighter with each passing minute. Finally, the principal's door opened. Dr. Marston appeared, hands folded, her expression that particular brand of polite neutrality worn by those who've already decided not to listen. Mrs. Hale, she said, extending a hand. Jamarcus, please come in. They entered the office, a space lined with plaques and framed photos of alumni, none of whom looked remotely like Jamarcus. Angela spoke first. Dr. Marston, I need to understand how my son can be suspended for doing what you're supposed to teach, thinking for himself. Dr. Marston gestured for them to sit. Mrs. Hale, this isn't about academic ability. Jamarcus is an exceptionally bright young man. But the incident in question involved an unexpected outburst during instructional time. An outburst? Angela said sharply. You mean he raised his hand? Marston hesitated. It was the manner in which... The manner? Angela cut her off. Do you mean his confidence? His skin? What's the manner exactly that makes my son a problem for you? Marston blinked, flustered. Mrs. Hale, please understand. No, Angela said, her voice breaking, but steady. You understand. I scrub offices where your staff work. I've spent 20 years keeping floors clean enough for people like you to step over me. But my son, he's not someone you get to step over. Not anymore. For the first time, the principal's mask slipped. A shadow crossed her face. Guilt, maybe, or defensiveness. I assure you, race is not a factor. Then why is it only my son facing discipline when students laughed at him for existing? No answer. The silence was suffocating. Angela stood. We'll appeal. And when we do, I want the board to explain how academic excellence became insubordination. She turned, motioning for Jamarcus to follow. He rose slowly, meeting Marston's gaze. You can erase the chalk, he said quietly. But not the truth. Then they left. That evening, Jamarcus sat by the window, watching streetlights flicker against the damp pavement. His mother paced the kitchen behind him, on the phone again, trying to find any advocate to help them. Most numbers led to dead ends. A few promised to look into it. She was relentless, but each conversation drained a little more color from her face. They don't care, she muttered finally, hanging up. They never do until it makes them look bad. Jamarcus turned toward her. Maybe I should just apologize, he said quietly. Angela froze. For what? For whatever they think I did. Her voice cracked as she stepped toward him. Don't you dare make yourself smaller for people who already can't see you. You did nothing wrong. He nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The next morning, news spread through whispers. Jamarcus Hale, the scholarship student who embarrassed his teacher, had been suspended. Some laughed it off. Others nodded knowingly, knew he'd pull something like that eventually. Someone said, but not everyone was blind. Emily overheard the gossip by the lockers. She clenched her jaw, anger twisting inside her. That afternoon she opened her phone and typed a message she'd never sent before. To a student-run online forum, Westwood suspended a black student for solving a math problem. If you care about fairness, you should know what's happening here. She hit send. Within an hour, the post began circulating quietly among students. Screenshots, whispers, reposts. Something was building under the surface. But Angela and Jamarcus didn't know that yet. All they knew was the exhaustion of another door closing. Angela folded the suspension letter neatly, slid it into a folder, and placed it on the counter. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I've been fighting this kind of thing my whole life. But I thought if you worked hard enough, if you were smart enough, they couldn't ignore you. Jamarcus stared at the paper. They still did. She turned away so he wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. Outside, rain began to fall. Slow at first, then harder, streaking the window with long gray lines. Jamarcus watched it, the sound like static filling the silence between them. And somewhere deep down, he realized this wasn't just about him. There were others, other students whose names were never spoken, whose stories never reached anyone outside those walls. He wasn't the only one being silenced. He was just the loudest. As the rain poured harder outside, another black student at Westwood opened her inbox to find a warning of her own, and a secret that would change everything. The leak arrived quietly, like a pin dropped in a cavern. In the early evening, Jamarcus's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown student. Elias, you up for something? He dismissed it. Then, more pings. See this screenshot. They're talking. Watch your step. He thought it might be a prank. He showed Angela, who frowned and told him not to click. But curiosity nagged. He opened one image. The screenshot lit his screen. A chat thread. Dozens of participants. Names blurred. Some anonymous. Others clearly staff or well-known students. He scrolled, heart pounding. The messages were casual, cruel, systemic. Did you see Hale try to answer today? So extra. Yeah, like we let him get fancy. Not in our class. Scholarship kids thinking they can run charts. Let's remind him who pays tuition. The look on Pennington's face. Priceless. They should stick to remedial. It's safer. His stomach twisted. He tapped another screenshot. Staff commenting. He's too loud. We need to calm him. I'd love to see his file again. Let's keep it quiet, but he needs to understand his place. One message stunned him. Wait until midnight. Screenshots go live on all campus boards. Jamarcus swallowed. A group chat mocking students like him, with teachers, with power. He looked at Angela. She was pale. Within minutes, the first campus gossip bubbled. Students whispered in hallways. Have you seen the chat? They were saying your name a lot. Teachers glanced at their phones. Some hurried into offices. A few staff faces tightened when students walked by. At lunch, Emily passed him a note. Check your messages. A lot is going to change. He excused himself to the library and sat at a terminal. He typed in the alias names, traced them to student profiles, cross-checked staff emails. Some identities matched known voices, people he'd encountered. The bruise of betrayal pressed heavy. He snapped screenshots. He recorded timestamps. He archived the thread in hidden folders. He needed evidence before it vanished, before someone scrubbed it. The next day at school, the chat was exploding. Offline and online. Students clustered over phones, flipping through screenshots, sharing, whispering. The hush around Jamarcus crackled. Some offered nods of support. Some averted their eyes. Some judged him. This is his drama now. During a free period, a sophomore approached him. She trembled. They were talking about me too, she said, voice low. You're not alone. He looked at her, pain and resolve mingling in his eyes. We're going to expose this. But the cost pressed on him. Every glance, every whisper, felt watched. He entered Mrs. Pennington's class. Same room, but the air crackled differently. Students kept their heads down. The board was bare. The room's memory felt hollow. Later, Angela got a phone call from a parent. The voice was urgent and low. Did you see the chat screenshots? Some of my child's tagged too. I'm forwarding everything to a reporter. Angela's hand froze around the phone. Jamarcus in the next room heard her gasp. He dashed over. What happened? She said. Someone's going public. He swallowed. Are you okay with that? She looked at him, eyes fierce. Hell yes. As dusk fell, local news outlets began receiving anonymous emails. Photos of the group chat, staff names, dates, references to Jamarcus, references to other students, a reporter's address, a demand for comment. That night, Jamarcus lay awake, phone in hand, expecting alerts. He received none. For now. The silence felt loaded, like the calm before a storm. But he already knew the storm had begun. One of the parents was about to forward the chat to a local journalist, and once the leak went public, nothing could stay hidden. By the time Jamarcus's mother fell asleep that night, whispers had already become a rustling storm across digital corridors. The leaked chat, once confined to phones and secret threads, found its way into public view. An anonymous local blog ran the headline, Black Genius Suspended After Solving Equation. Under it, screenshots, context, and outrage. Within hours, the post exploded. The hashtag NUD, Let Jamarcus Solve, trended regionally. Another sprang up, Math While Black, a sharp echo of deeper frustration. Students across the city posted, I've felt invisible in class. This is my math teacher too. The narrative widened. It wasn't just about a student or a school. It was about a system designed to keep certain voices quiet. Westwood's administration responded with a tidal wave of denials. Emails went out. Allegations are being investigated. This school upholds respect and equity. They scrubbed social media accounts, deleted tagged posts, removed campus message boards showing the screenshots. They sent a letter to parents. Please disregard rumors and await official updates. In the halls of Westwood the following day, the tension was visible in every step. Teachers walked faster. Phones turned screens down. Students passed each other with eyes on their screens, whispering. Some clustered around phones. Others kept their heads down. Jamarcus, walking to class, felt a current of stares. Some supportive, some wary, many uncertain. Emily stopped him in the corridor. She held out her phone. They're posting this all over Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. They even made a video. She showed him trending feeds. The blog's link shared by students, parents, local activists. He scrolled through replies. This is institutional racism. They can't punish a proof. Let every black student teach a class. He swallowed. The world was watching. Word reached Dr. Eli Spencer that afternoon. He read the blog post, then cross-checked the photos, screenshots, and appended files. He saw the same proof he had watched in class, the same chat messages he had glimpsed shadows of, only now illuminated. His pulse quickened. Jamarcus's moment, once small and contained, was now public. He drafted a message to his contacts at Harvard, flagging the student. This is one to watch. Intellectual integrity, social courage. Meanwhile, Angela Hale poured over the flood of posts in her living room. Some were supportive. Stay strong. We see you. You changed more than math. Others were vicious. Crude slurs, dismissive remarks, memes mocking the situation. She steadied her breath. She forwarded copies to Jamarcus, to friends, to possible local media. The net was widening. At school, the student newspaper ran an online story. Suspended student or silenced prodigy. The editorial called for transparency, for open forums. Emails poured into the editor's inbox. Some from alumni, some from parents, some from strangers in nearby cities asking which Westwood is this. The school board met behind closed doors. They circulated press statements. They weighed reputational damage. They considered whether to pivot. Some voices on the board argued that a quiet settlement was needed. Offer to reinstate discreetly, issue a non-public apology. Others feared scandal. They had underestimated how fast this would spread. Inside a classroom, a teacher stood at the front. She accessed the school's internal feed. She saw that the blog post had been shared in the staff chat. Her face paled. She lowered the screen. Her posture stiffened. Around her, whispers in class multiplied. Students asked, "Is it true?" Teachers answered vaguely. "We're looking into it." Jamarcus sat in his usual seat. His notebook lay untouched. He watched screens flicker with his name. He felt something half like fear, half like electricity. He understood what was happening. His moment was no longer his alone. At noon, the local news station posted a short teaser on social media. Controversy at elite prep school. Student suspended after math triumph. It linked to a story promised later that evening. The teaser went viral locally. Parent groups shared it. A hashtag grew, Westwood Watch. In the evening news cycle, the story made the cut. A reporter narrated a summary. The student, the proof, the suspension, the leak. Interviews with unnamed parents. Outraged voices. Defenses by the school's spokesperson. The anchorman's tone was measured but pointed. The images flashed. The board meeting room. Students gathering phones. The deleted posts. The shadows of protest. At home, Jamarcus watched the clip on his laptop. Angela sat beside him. Hand on his, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "They can't silence the truth." She nodded. "They'll try." Late that night, a tweet popped into his notifications. "This kid just sent Westwood, scrambling. Watch who steps in next. Let Jamarcus solve." It came from an account named Westwood Alum 88. The profile picture, a graduation photo, black and white, class of 1988. He tweeted a thread, "Westwood's reputation built on excellence. Let's see how they respond when one black student reminds them they need more than tradition. They need justice." Within minutes, the thread gained hundreds of retweets. Alumni pages reposted it. Comments poured. "I graduated there. I never saw anything like this. Did they really suspend a student for brilliance? School wants to delete proof. Erase story. Not on my watch." The old alum's voice injected a new weight into the narrative. He was part of their identity. His name gave legitimacy. Westwood's legacy was now on trial. From her office, Mrs. Pennington received a notification. Westwood Alum 88 just called you out." Her screen glowed. She stared. Her fingers trembled. The conversation thread opened. "You saw what happened today, Miss Pe." The class froze. The board froze. The proof. She closed her laptop. Unseen, Dr. Eli Spencer retweeted the alum's thread with a quiet note. Exactly. His circle of influence took notice. His nod unlocked more attention. Jamarcus stared at the screen. He knew what happened when someone within the system speaks truth to power. The floodgates open. Pressure mounts. Choices reduce. He'd crossed a line. No more hiding. Outside, a storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered. The next morning would demand responses from students, teachers, the board, the alum, and him. But the most dangerous moment was still ahead. A viral tweet caught the attention of an old Westwood alum, and his next move would force the school's deepest secret into the open. Westwood Preparatory Academy had long cultivated an image of elite excellence. White stucco facades, ivy crawling over stone pillars, manicured lawns lined with chestnut trees. Inside, the halls smelled of polished oak and old money. The unspoken rules were rigid. Success, prestige, pedigree. Black students were anomalies, exceptions to the design, and Jamarcus Hale, arriving on a diversity scholarship, was viewed skeptically from day one. He remembered the moment of acceptance. A letter delivered on a gray afternoon. His mother's hands trembling. The inked signature almost surreal. When he stepped into orientation, he felt eyes flicker like hesitations in mirrors. Some students nodded politely. Others whispered under breath. Did he belong? Teachers greeted him with cool politeness, as though he were a specimen under examination rather than a peer. He greeted them back, but his voice often went unregistered. "Howdy, Miss Heel," one teacher would say without looking up from her clipboard. "Good to see you," another would murmur, but rarely a smile, rarely a question. Over time, patterns crystallized. In class, when hands went up, teachers would scan the room and pass him over. When an advanced problem was presented, they'd call on Preston, Emily, or other top students first. As though there already existed a pecking order, that excluded him by default. If Jamarcus answered anyway, the responses came laced with disbelief. How did you come to that? Show your work more clearly. Are you sure you used the theorem correctly? Each phrasing implied a suspicion, not of error but of legitimacy. He answered carefully, double-checking in his head before speaking. Yet still, second guess. Classmates whispered too. In hallways he'd pass small clusters of white students, who would fall silent, then resume conversation once he was past. Words like affirmative action, token, quota drifted behind him. Sometimes he heard, he only got in because they had to fill a black seat. Sometimes he overheard a teacher say, just quietly enough, don't give him too much praise. People will say we're showing off. These weren't conspiracies. They were casual remarks, the background radiation of a system that never intended him to matter. At home, Jamarcus felt the pressure in his mother's eyes each night. She cleaned offices until midnight, came home to fold laundry, and whispered prayers in the hallway so he wouldn't hear. She believed so deeply in him that her voice sometimes cracked with the effort. Their small apartment smelled of bleach and secondhand dust. The silence after she worked late was heavy with unspoken fear, fear that the system would break him, that his brilliance would be dismissed or crushed. One evening, she said to him over the dinner plate, Jamarcus, you amaze me. But they won't always see what you see. You must learn to make them see you. He nodded, not knowing how. She smiled. Sat. He went to his room and stared at equations scrawled on his notepad, wondering which tools would force them to look. In his first months at Westwood, Jamarcus learned to preempt skepticism. He spoke with careful clarity, annotated every step, cited sources, wrote margins. He volunteered to help peers, but rarely got thanked. He sat at the far edges of study groups. Friends were few. He kept his distance. The brilliance, he reasoned, would have to speak louder than his silence. Within that context, the calculus classroom held both dread and opportunity. Mrs. Pennington's reputation for rigor was well known. Students revered or feared her. Her approval was gold. But for Jamarcus, her disinterest always hovered. No matter how well he answered, she never quite seemed satisfied. She valued neatness and conformity over creative leaps, the kind of leaps Jamarcus excelled in. He had adapted, abiding by her format, though sometimes his insight strained the constraint. He watched other students. Preston joked, attempted shortcuts, counted on a teacher's leniency. Emily was cautious but adept. They practiced in study halls, talked through problems aloud, discussed alternative methods. Jamarcus often sat alone, mentally teaching himself. He knew proofs Emily had never heard. He knew shortcuts Preston would never conceive, but he remained invisible, like an undiscovered constellation behind thick clouds. There were quieter wards of the academy, the scholarship students, often black or brown, who clustered like islands. They exchanged guarded humor, commiserated at subtle slights, a teacher passing them by, a tutor ignoring their question. Someone writing "Go back to where you came from" in a margin. Jamarcus joined cautiously, wary of being labeled. He listened, and he saved anecdotes. One day, at lunch, a peer whispered loudly, "Hey, did you see Jamarcus yesterday?" He tried to answer in physics and got shut down. Others nodded, smirking. Some said, "Yeah, he's smart, but he doesn't belong in here." Jamarcus sat alone at a corner table, untouched tray before him. He closed his eyes, swallowed. The room around him felt glass-walled. He yearned to walk out, but he stayed, because he had something to prove. As this climate built, the calculus problem they were about to receive loomed as more than academic work. It was a test of belonging, of whether he could breach the barrier that had been quietly erected around him. Miss Pennington's assignments were never neutral. They favored the expected, the conventional. This one, a twisted multivariable challenge, felt like a trap or a gauntlet. In her mind, perhaps she believed no one would solve it. In his mind, perhaps she believed he could. When Mrs. Pennington unveiled the problem that morning, Jamarcus recognized it instantly. It was an uncommon variation, one that required insight beyond mechanical steps, a problem that could distinguish someone who memorized from someone who understood. For him, it glowed like a signal. He felt adrenaline turn cold in his veins. This was his chance, but also his risk. If he failed publicly, the laughter they'd heap on him might solidify the narrative he fought against. No one in class knew he recognized that variant. Only he understood its core trick. They murmured and struggled, sketched curves, Applied substitution. He felt them around him, the air thick with doubt, resisting his mind's clarity. He took a breath. He raised his hand. And the laughter erupted. Not because he was wrong, but because of who he was. The echo of that laughter stabbed him in the chest, cold and unexpected. He paused, chest tight. He'd been raised by that unspoken rule. Do better than expected, but never enough to be bigger than them. He'd seen it modeled, mimicked, enforced. Now here, in that room, he faced its rawest form. But he did not retract. He did not shrink. Instead, he stood and went forward to the board. He would make them look. And that shift, from invisible to undeniably present, would ripple far beyond that classroom. He knew somewhere in the tension, the fear, the shock that this moment had the power to break something deeply wrong. But the calculus problem was more than just math. It was a test of belonging. When Jamarcus's hand went up and the laughter tore across the room, no one realized how the next seconds would force every authority in that building to reckon with him. Late that night, when most of the world slept, Jamarcus's phone chimed again. He opened the inbox, expecting another viral alert, another news clip. Instead, he saw a single email, short, formal, unsigned at first glance. But the sender address was unmistakable, chloe@lowtechventures.com. Subject to Jamarcus Hale. Body, your recent ordeal has come to my attention. I am a Westwood alum, class of '88. I once sat in those same seats, watched similar slights. I believe you. If you are interested in guidance and opportunities far beyond this school's walls, reply to this. K. Lowe. He stared at the words. His heart pounded. He flicked over to Angela, who sat in the next room, eyes open in the darkness. He whispered, someone just emailed me. She came into his room, squinting at the screen. Recognizing the name, her mouth fell open. Kendrick Lowe? She said. The name rang in their memory. An alumnus turned tech magnate, rarely seen in press, but reputed throughout alumni circles. He had funded startups, quietly, anonymously. Now it seemed he extended a hand. Jamarcus typed a reply. Yes, I would appreciate that. Thank you. He hit send, and his fingers trembled. He lay awake, imagining what mentorship from someone powerful could mean. Escape, protection, validation. He felt something shift inside. Maybe this could be bigger than Westwood's walls. The next morning, he walked into school under the weight of expectation. The email's promise felt fragile in daylight. Teachers looked at him differently. Some avoided eye contact. Students lingered in the hallway, trying to read his expression. Emily approached him at the lockers. She asked gently, "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Better than I was." She smiled. Carefully. "That email, was that from him?" she asked. He glanced at his phone, then shook his head. "Maybe. I'll tell you later." During class transitions, he glanced at the inbox again. No response yet from Lowe. Just the original email and his reply marked sent. But in his mind, the possibility hovered, like the echo of light before sunrise. Then came the summons. At lunch, the principal's assistant handed him a crisp white envelope. No Dear Jamarcus. No soft language. Simply notice, disciplinary hearing. Time 3:30 p.m. Location, boardroom. The world around him blurred for a moment. A buzz of voices, footsteps, lockers, slamming. The word hearing felt like indictment in that envelope. Not inquiry, accusation. He looked at Angela during break period. She squeezed his arm. "You'll be heard," she said, though her eyes betrayed fear. At 3:30 he entered the boardroom, again. But this time the weight was heavier. The air smelled of polished wood, stale coffee, and authority. The same board members, the principal, Mrs. Pennington, sat behind a long mahogany table. Their faces were tight, rehearsed. He sat in the chair facing them. The room was hushed. The sunlight through the windows cast long shadows across the floor. Dr. Marston spoke first. "Mr. Hale, this hearing is in response to complaints and disruption of classroom order. We have compiled testimony, staff statements, and now invite you to respond." One by one, staff members rose and read what looked like pre-written statements. Students were uncomfortable. Some said they felt undermined. Others accused his behavior of causing class anxiety. No one mentioned the proof or the brilliance. It was all about perception, decorum, structure. When the last statement concluded, silence pressed in. He took a breath. He felt eyes on him. Students, teachers, board members. He stood, I will answer. His voice shook slightly, but he forced clarity. I raised my hand. I solved a problem. That problem was correct. If the methodology was unfamiliar, it doesn't make it invalid. Mrs. Pennington cleared her throat. She read from her prepared remarks. She said, "Your actions yesterday caused disruption. Some students were confused. I asked for order. You defied structure." He looked at her. He understood then. The pain was not that she disagreed, but that she would reduce brilliance to defiance. He replied softly, "Order is not the absence of new thought. Structure is not the limit of understanding." One board member interjected, "Are you saying the standards you disliked are beneath you?" "No," Jamarcus said. "I'm saying they're unfinished. They can be challenged. They must accommodate growth, especially in education." A murmur spread. Some eyes sharpened, some softened. The room shifted. The principal leaned forward. "We will deliberate. You may leave now, and expect a decision soon." He nodded and exited. His legs felt weak. Once outside, he breathed deeply, letting tension spill out. Emily waited by the door. She grabbed his hand, eyes bright. "You spoke truth," she said. He touched her palm, steadying himself. "We'll see if they see truth too."
That evening, Jamarcus's phone glowed again. The inbound email was from chloe@akinventures.com. "You have strength. I will reach out soon about mentorship. Stay steady."
He exhaled. He had a lifeline, a presence beyond Westwood's culture war. But the school had other plans. As Jamarcus walked home that evening, he passed the building's marquee board, where an ominous message was already flashing: "Discipline hearing results tonight." The boardroom door loomed before him, heavy and polished, like a portal he couldn't refuse. Jamarcus Hale stepped inside with measured breath. The room felt cold, its air strained with the weight of authority. White walls, large windows, a long walnut conference table, polished to a sheen, legal folders spread in front of each administrator, law books stacked on side shelves. Sunlight streamed in, fracturing over the floor, as though distorting the world outside. He took a seat at the table's end, opposite a panel of 5, the principal, 2 board members, a school attorney, and Mrs. Pennington. Not a single person of color among them. No mentor, no ally, no teacher who'd spoken for him. Only stoic faces and paper stacks. He felt exposed. Dr. Marston spoke first, her tone coldly formal. "We have convened this disciplinary hearing in light of numerous concerns: disruption, insubordination, undermining classroom structure, failure to adhere to prescribed curriculum. Mr. Hale, you may respond." One by one, voices read statements. A white teacher claimed, "I felt challenged in a way I had not expected." Students were uneasy. A student voice, soft, trembling, read, "I was confused. His approach made me doubt what I knew." A parent letter was read, "We entrust Westwood to maintain order. Sudden, unvetted methods alarm parents." None mentioned the proof's correctness. None acknowledged that his answer had solved the board's impossible problem. The narrative had already transformed his triumph into a crime. When the statements ended, Jamarcus stood, his shoulders squared, throat dry. He spoke clearly. "I did not act with insubordination. I acted with curiosity and logic. I used theorems, substitution, boundary continuity, all valid under higher mathematics." He paused, meeting eyes. "If my method unsettled some, it is because they had not considered it before, but that does not make it invalid." Mrs. Pennington cleared her throat, rising to respond via prepared remarks. "Your approach disregarded classroom structure. It created confusion among students. You took control away from the teacher." He met her gaze. "The control of knowledge should not belong to hierarchy alone. Students deserve to see truth, not only what teachers permit." Her eyes flashed. The school attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Hale, your words will be entered into the record. This hearing is not about your opinion, but about whether your conduct violated school policy." One board member, strict, square-jawed, asked, "Do you admit you broke protocol?" He answered, "If following logic is breaking protocol, then perhaps protocol is inadequate. But I do not regret what I did." A hush fell. The board conferred in whispers. The principal opened a file. Papers rustled. The challenge was no longer academic. It was legal. Dr. Marston spoke next. "Due to the severity of the matter and the disruptions reported, the board may consider expulsion or immediate suspension pending final hearing." The words expulsion felt like a guillotine. Jamarcus swallowed. His heart hammered. He glanced around. Emily sat in the back row, face pale. Other students huddled behind the windows, watching. Before a decision could be announced, the door at the back clicked open. Heads turned. A man slipped in carrying a stack of printed sheets. He moved quietly, but confidently, his arrival unexpected, unannounced. Board members looked up. The stranger's presence jolted the room's tension into sharp awareness. He walked to the table's edge and placed the papers before the principal. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, voice calm. "But this needs to be part of the record." Dr. Marston frowned. Standing. "Who are you?" He glanced at Jamarcus first, then to the board. "My name is Dr. Eli Spencer. I was present in the classroom that day, incognito. I observed the entire event. I have transcripts of the chat logs, detailed notes on the proof, and the video recording from the lecture hall's feed." Gasps spun through the room. Mrs. Pennington's hand trembled. The board members sat straighter. The attorney shifted forward. Spencer continued. "I also have evidence of the private group chat, staff involvement, and the mistaken narrative that has been constructed. This isn't just about semantics. This is about truth." He handed several packets to Dr. Marston and the attorney. The principal's face went pale as she leafed through. Spencer's steady gaze moved to Jamarcus. "You deserve a fair hearing. This changes the context." The school attorney cleared his throat. "These materials will be examined, but their admittance is subject to review." Spencer nodded. "I understand. But if you deny them, you'll deny transparency itself." In that moment, the balance shifted. The board whispered among themselves. The room stilled. The hearing's tone changed from accusation to uncertainty. Jamarcus exhaled. Relief flickered, but he knew the danger was only deeper now. Dr. Marston regained composure. "We will recess to review these documents. This hearing is adjourned until further notice." The boardroom emptied swiftly. Students pressed into hallways, talking. Some teachers, faces tight, followed Spencer out. Mrs. Pennington lingered behind, staring at the table, at the papers, at a truth she could not yet deny. In the corridor, Spencer met Jamarcus and Emily. He said quietly, "You're not alone now." Emily reached for Jamarcus's hand. He squeezed it back, bracing himself. They emerged into daylight. Jamarcus's phone chimed. A message. "They're reviewing. Stay ready." Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters had stormed the perimeter. After the leak, their lenses focused on him, the young student at the center of storm. Questions shouted. "Can we get comment? Will you be reinstated?" He lifted his eyes to the flashes, to spectators who had come after reading threads, stories, the viral hashtag. In that moment he realized, the trial was no longer confined to Westwood's walls. The entire community watched. The narrative could shift again, with power on either side. But Spencer's presence meant someone had already climbed inside the walls. Someone who saw the truth. Jamarcus inhaled, steadying himself against the glare of cameras and the weight of possibilities. But as he walked away, through the sea of press, a reporter whispered in his ear, "You're in deeper than you think." The morning sunlight struck the Westwood preparatory facade, as if spotlighting a trial scene. Classical architecture, marble steps, banners of legacy, but now shadowed by scandal. Across the airwaves, cameras rolled, reporters planted outside the gates, social media threads buzzing. The leaked group chat, once whispered in private, had become public reckoning. National news networks ran segments: elite prep and racism scandal, black students suspended after academic triumph, when equity fails in schools. On screen, anchors debated systemic bias, institutional defensiveness, and the role of elite education in preserving exclusion. Some interviews featured black students from across the country who had experienced being sidelined in advanced classes. The chat messages screen captured, annotated, circled, showed cruelty, mockery, complicity. Staff names, student names blurred or edited out, but the tone was unmistakable. Former Westwood alumni spoke. One voice on TV, a white woman who had graduated in the early 2000s, said, "I remember whispers like this back then, but we ignored them. It didn't feel possible to believe they existed." Another alum, now a lawyer, commented, "Institutions like these guard their image by silencing those who threaten the narrative. Jamarcus's case is a mirror." Westwood's board members, cloaked in press statements and lawyer-reviewed emails, tried to reinstitute control. They issued a public apology, but with qualifiers. We regret how some were offended. We are reviewing policies. We affirm commitment to diversity. But apologies without ownership rang hollow on national TV. Protests sprouted outside the gates within 24 hours. Students, parents, alumni, and community activists gathered. Signs read, "Let Jamarcus solve. Solve, don't silence. Not a token, not a problem." Some wore math formula t-shirts. Others held up photos of Jamarcus's proof, chanting, singing, drumming. "We demand equity, not apology." The local press covered it live. The national networks cut in with helicopter shots. The steps of the school, once symbols of prestige, now stages of resistance. In classrooms, the mood had changed. Teachers arrived in hushed tones. Some apologized quietly to black students. Some avoided eye contact. In math class, students whispered. Some passed printed copies of the proof under desks. Emily turned and mouthed to a friend, "Look at this. Maybe she'll teach us this version tomorrow." A few white classmates looked uncomfortable, as if the ground themselves had tilted under them. Board meetings shifted tone. The board members who had once insisted on secrecy were now publicly defensive, trimming statements, offering listening sessions, promising cultural training. But the momentum was too large. The national spotlight had ignited something internal and external. Westwood's administration tried containment. They canceled after-school events to refocus on academics. They locked down newsletters. They asked faculty to avoid social media commentary. They released statements. "We do not tolerate discrimination. We will work to do better." But the chat messages were archive proof. The screenshots lived beyond their control. On TV, pundits speculated. Would Harvard or MIT issue a statement? Would Kendrick Lowe, whose email had surfaced, step in? Would Jamarcus sue for damages? Lawyers weighed libel, equity, academic due process. Civil rights advocates offered to support legal fundraisers. The narrative had exploded into a national debate on race, education, power. Inside the building, pressure mounted. Mrs. Pennington's classes were hushed. She moved through halls with eyes cast down. Students no longer raised their hands freely. Teachers' offices were stricter. The school newspaper, once toothless, published editorials demanding full transparency. Even some white parents began asking hard questions. What do we do now? Some left their afternoon work to join protest lines. The pressure from reporters, alumni, parents, students all converged. In one heated live interview, a reporter asked Dr. Marston, "Why didn't Westwood act earlier? Why punish the student doing the problem, instead of rewarding him for brilliance?" She stammered, then replied, "Policies must be upheld. No one is above the rules." The statement drew backlash instantly. On TV and social feeds, memes circulated. The rule is to remain silent. Meanwhile, legal counsel walked the board halls, preparing for lawsuits and investigations. Westwood's PR team drafted damage control, ranking which narratives to accept, which to deny, which to spin. They circulated talking points to faculty. Avoid internal conflicts. Embrace humility. Let the process proceed. Amid chaos, Jamarcus sat quietly in his room, watching the storm build, affixed to screens, articles, interviews, social media threads. The world was watching him. He felt the weight of expectation, the fragility of his voice, and the pull of a movement he hadn't asked to lead. He watched Emily's message, asking if she'd seen a particular news clip. He watched Angela forward donor offers, legal support, alumni messages. He watched Kendrick Lowe's name appear in comments. Will he step forward? We need him now. He watched journalists attempt to contact him. He watched Westwood's statements refresh with disclaimers. He felt a tremor inside him. Pride, fear, grief, responsibility. He realized the war had moved beyond classrooms. It was now in headlines, litigation, legacy. Suddenly, his phone pinged. A missed call from an unknown number, another from a local reporter, and then a new email, subject line, "Urgent embedded doc attached." He clicked. The file was titled Westwood History Report.tet. The preview lines read, "Unearthed institutional records, previous inclusion policies suppressed, former misconduct unreported." He froze. His chest tightened. The storm was not only about him now, it was about everything the school had hidden for decades. Inside, Jamarcus sat quietly, watching a storm build that he never asked for. and the next email revealed a secret about Westwood's past big enough to change everything. By the time the dust settled, or appeared to, Jamarcus Hale's name was no longer just that of a suspended student. It had become a symbol of injustice, of brilliance forced into fight, of a school's exposed rot. Universities that once passed over his application now leaned in. Offers to interview, to evaluate, to admit poured like rain. Harvard's admissions team, already aware via Dr. Spencer's internal notes, sent a formal letter inviting a virtual sit-down. MIT's mathematics department forwarded a rubric and a request to solve a live proof under supervision. Princeton invited him to a weekend session at their campus. Oxford's outreach office, mindful of the headlines, offered an academic scholarship contingent on community impact credentials. Even lesser-known schools made offers. The Ivy ladder shook with his assent. But amidst the flurry, Jamarcus sat in his room, notebook open, eyes weary. Under warm lamplight, he scrolled through emails. Admit with full scholarship. Bridge fellowship available. Cover your first 2 years housing. Professor willing to mentor you. All this while Westwood still held the note that he was a disruptor. His mind flickered over the distance between words and reality. Angela watched him from the doorway. Her fingers twitched against the worn door jamb. You deserve every one of these, she said quietly. Her voice held grief, pride, fear woven. But which ones mean more? Those that want you, or those who need you? He looked up. I have to believe some mean both, he replied. The next day, during a study hall, Emily leaned in. She passed him a printed page. Kendrick Lowe endorses Jamarcus for National STEM Grant. The article quoted Lowe's tweet. Brilliance like that doesn't belong hidden. It belongs uplifted. Jamarcus stared. A name that was once contact would now become pathway. But he remembered how he was treated at Westwood. How every step of his ascent had been challenged, undermined, questioned. He needed more than promises. He needed integrity. That evening, he drafted a response to Lowe's earlier email. He wrote, Thank you. I want guidance. But I need someone who sees me, not what I can do for optics. He sent it. Then he sat back, phone in hand, waiting. Days passed. The admission offers multiplied, and school corridors buzzed. Students stopped him in hallways. Teachers avoided him. Some congratulated. Many looked at him as though he were a brand now. The weight of visibility pressed on him. Sometimes he felt drained, like he couldn't keep pace. But then a reply came from Kendrick Lowe. Jamarcus, your message matters. I see both your power and your pain. I'd like to fly you to Boston. For a meeting. My team, academic review, potential sponsorship. If you accept, I'll cover all costs. No strings attached. Just possibility. That night, Jamarcus and Angela pored over the email. It felt like an escape route, but also a crossroads. To go would mean stepping out of his community's battleground. But to stay would mean enduring Westwood's scrutiny longer. Angela's eyes glistened. If you don't take this, I'll take it for you, she whispered. He nodded. He would go. The next day, with a bustle of checks and plans, he packed bags. Westwood's gates felt narrower now, full of ghosts of confrontation. Emily walked him to the door. She hugged him tight. Just remember what you're doing this for, she said. He promised he would. In Atlanta, at the private jet lounge, Lowe's team greeted him. A quiet suite, warm lights, faces without glare. Lowe himself appeared, impeccably dressed, calm, intense. He extended a hand. Welcome, Jamarcus. Let's see where this goes. They toured labs, met academic directors, looked at funding pipelines. Lowe shared stories of his youth, how he'd once felt unwelcome in elite circles, how he'd built rooms for hidden thinkers to enter. The parallels with Jamarcus's story sat heavy between them. Lowe spoke softly. I want to invest in you, not as token but as principle. Jamarcus asked direct questions. Will you help me, even if people talk? Will you stand by me when the heat comes? Lowe nodded. The gesture was real. They drafted a proposal. Lowe would sponsor a summer research fellowship for Jamarcus at a top lab, cover his early college costs, and open doors to networks. In return, Jamarcus would help mentor underrepresented math students nationwide. The terms felt fair. After the meeting, as they walked through a quiet hallway, Lowe stopped, turned toward him. I trust you'll rise higher than I ever did. But I also know the system tries to weigh you down. There was power in the confidence. Jamarcus felt its weight, and promise simultaneously. But Westwood had not forgotten him. Back in his emailed school file, administrators watched the developments. The board's lawyers exchanged memos. Some argued that they should reach settlement with Jamarcus to restore him quietly and control the narrative. Others warned that if they reacted too soon, the optics would collapse them further. The invitation to Boston was not just opportunity, it was leverage. The kind of leverage Westwood feared. As he flew back, between clouds and quiet, Jamarcus thought of Westwood's gates, of the boardroom, of the campus steps now framed by protest signs. He thought of Emily, Angela, the students whose whispers had become roars. He thought of Lowe, and the possibility he offered. He landed. As he stepped into the terminal, his phone chimed. A headline flashed. Westwood offers Jamarcus reinstatement, but with conditions. According to leaked statements, the offer included returning under supervision, curtailing public commentary, and agreeing to limit academic challenges. Every fiber of his body recoiled. Reinstatement under silence? That was not freedom. That was containment. He stared at the message. He typed, "I'll consider, but terms must guarantee voice." He hit send. In his inbox, another message waited. A forwarded board memo titled Reinstatement Plan Draft. Under it, in small type, a warning, subject to non-disclosure. His gut sank. Westwood's plan was not reconciliation. It was a controlled redemption. As he stood in the terminal, suitcase in hand, surrounded by rushing travelers, unaware of the storm, he glanced at Lowe's email thread. Lowe had just sent a note. "Let me know what they propose. Don't say yes until you're sure." Jamarcus breathed deep. He had offers, power, backing, and a school trying to bend narrative again. Kendrick Lowe had invited him to Boston, with a deal that could change everything. But as Jamarcus walked toward the airport exits, his phone lit up with a new email from Westwood. Its subject line chilling. "Confidential meeting tonight. Board and key stakeholders." His heart sank. The flight announcement over the speakers echoed faintly. Flight 38 to Boston now boarding. Final call. But his feet felt heavy, rooted. He tapped at his phone again. The screen flickered. A third text appeared. "You were never meant to leave tonight." Everything constricted around him. The buzz of the terminal. The countdown to boarding. The press of expectation. The swirl of scandal behind him. And now this alarming message in front of him. He looked at his boarding pass. He looked out at the hangar. He looked at the dark figure stepping back. He realized this was no accident. Someone had anticipated his departure. Someone had known his path. Jamarcus's suitcase lay open on his bed, clothes folded neatly, notebook stacked beside his planner, tickets and itinerary spread out. The flight to Boston would leave in hours. He ran his fingers over the leather handle, the hum of departure buzzing in his thoughts. This wasn't just a trip, it was a crossing point. Everything before would collide with everything after. Outside, the world was changing faster than he could follow. That morning, the Westwood School Board convened an emergency meeting. The decision reached behind closed doors leaked. Mrs. Pennington would be terminated. The charge cited her failure to maintain impartial teaching standards, undermining institutional order, and complicity in public controversy. The announcement came via a terse press release, dropped just as students arrived for class. In the corridors, it felt like dynamite. Teachers whispered behind closed doors. Some cried quietly. Some shut classroom doors early. Students gathered in the hallways, phones in hand, tracking every reaction. The news spread faster than wildfire. Pennington fired. Justice for Jamarcus. The teacher who silenced them no longer holds a seat. In front of Westwood's gates, protesters gathered earlier than ever. They held signs reading, "You fired the wrong person. We want more than token change. Teachers are tyrants." The crowd swelled. Students, parents, alumni, civic groups. News crews lined up along the sidewalk, capturing chants, tears, speeches. Local officials appeared, attempting to calm the grounds, but the tide of anger was bigger than any speech. A parent distribution list circulated a draft of a petition to the school board. Reinstate Mrs. Pennington's teaching position until a transparent investigation, release the full group chat logs, and rebuild trust. The board staff, in response, canceled after-school programs, locked campuses, and distributed statements emphasizing that the firing was necessary for restoration of balance and dignity in instruction. The financial underpinnings of Westwood, once unshakable, trembled. Local donors froze pledges. Alumni withheld funds. The town's boosters, once eager to display trophies and ivy, now whispered about scandal, reputation, and liability. The educational foundation that underwrote Westwood's programs considered suspending grants. A city meeting was called. Arguments over whether tax subsidies to the school should be cut. The kindergarten program might lose funding. Sports teams might lose equipment. The fabric of the community's pride began unraveling. In his home, Jamarcus watched as turmoil consumed his hometown. Angela paced the living room, phone in hand, contacting people she knew in local government, civil rights organizations, media. She canceled her cleaning shift for the day and volunteered at makeshift command centers on front lawns. On the TV, commentators debated whether Westwood was now irreparable, whether every elite prep school needed similar reckonings. His mother's eyes, gray in the fluorescent screen light, were both fierce and weary. She turned to him. "You did this," she said softly. "Not by choice, but by living out your truth." He nodded, but the cost weighed on him. He devoured tweets, live streams, student statements. Some demanded teachers be reinstated. Some demanded board resignations. Others said the entire institution needed dismantling. When the time came to depart, a car ride to the airport felt unreal. The streets blurred past, signs for welcome to Westwood, overshadowed by protest banners. He looked out the window, at the tall gates, the steps, the buildings he knew by memory, and the crowd below chanting. His heart pounded. At the airport, he moved through terminal doors, heavy bag in hand, heart heavy with expectation. He went through check-in, security, boarding pass lining up. Inside the waiting lounge, travelers settled, monitors flicked with flight numbers, but his phone was relentless. He sat near a window, overlooking the tarmac as he waited for his flight. He tried to focus on his boarding time, to breathe. He scrolled through emails. One was from Kendrick Lowe. "Safe travels. Talk soon in Boston." Another from Harvard. "Congratulations on final acceptance in full scholarship." And several from smaller institutions. "We would be honored to have you." But all of those paled in contrast to the raw moment unfolding. Then his phone buzzed with a text. "Stop the flight. Check the hangar." His breath caught, eyes widening. He reread it. No sender name, no context. A chill slid through him. His mind raced. Who could have sent that? What did it mean? Was it a warning? A threat? He looked around the terminal. Other passengers chatted, oblivious. Security guards passed. The departure board glowed overhead. His flight was still on schedule, but the text had unsettled every cell inside him. He typed back, "Who is this?" But the send box wouldn't register. Another message came immediately. "Do not fly tonight. You'll regret it." His fingers froze above the screen. He looked at his ticket. He looked at the gate number. He looked at the hangar windows beyond the runway. Something sat in the distance, planes, shadows, but one hangar door seemed open too early, wider than expected. He swallowed, heart thudding. He stood up, unsettled. The waiting lounge paused. People glanced. He grabbed his bag and strode toward the observation windows, toward the hangar glass. He peered across the tarmac. A dark figure stood near the open door. It looked like someone waiting. A tall figure, silhouetted. He squinted. The angle was ambiguous, but the posture was familiar. His heart sank. The flight announcement over the speakers echoed faintly. "Flight 13-8 to Boston now boarding. Final call." But his feet felt heavy, rooted. He tapped at his phone again. The screen flickered. A third text appeared. "You were never meant to leave tonight." Everything constricted around him. The buzz of the terminal, the countdown to boarding, the press of expectation, the swirl of scandal behind him, and now this alarming message in front of him. He looked at his boarding pass. He looked out at the hangar. He looked at the dark figure stepping back. He realized this was no accident. Someone had anticipated his departure. Someone had known his path. He turned slowly, phone clenched. The text made him stop in his tracks, and behind the hangar window that silhouetted figure raised a hand, as though signaling him not to board. He sat in the terminal, boarding pass in his hand, heart pounding, throat tight. Around him, travelers murmured, screens flickered, calls echoed. But a new certainty replaced the adrenaline. He could not board that plane tonight. Not yet. Jamarcus stood, suitcase rolling behind him, and walked toward the exit. He passed cameras, blinking gates, glances of confusion and curiosity. He exited the terminal into the dusk air, phone tight in his hand, mind working through the possibilities. He drove home in silence with Angela. The city lights blurred. At home he sat at his desk, opened his laptop. Messages from universities hovered, promises glowing. But in his mind a sharper voice insisted, this fight was not over. The story he'd become was about more than his success. It was about opening doors for others still trapped behind walls. He replied to Kendrick Lowe's email, I'm postponing Boston for now. I want to build something back home first. Can we talk about that path? He hit send. The screen blinked. He exhaled, tired but resolute. Angela looked at him from the doorway. He nodded, though his hands shook. I have to. If I leave now, they win by silence. If I stay, I carry what we started.
In the coming weeks, Westwood's board moved forward with their phased reinstatement plan. They offered to readmit him under monitored status, with restrictions. He declined. He declined their conditional redemption. Instead, he started building.
With Kendrick's early encouragement, he raised seed funds. Lowe made a quiet transfer, enough to lease a small building downtown, rooms for math, science, computer labs. Jamarcus called it Hale STEM Institute. The mission, free high-level instruction and mentoring for underrepresented students in the region. He hired Black and brown educators, some former Westwood scholarship students, to teach advanced courses that Westwood never would. He opened an application and was surprised by how many responses arrived. Young students hungry for rigor, whose schools ignored them. News outlets covered the launch. Scholar builds school, not just degree. Black genius returns home with purpose. Headlines framed him not as victim, but as visionary. Westwood watched. The school board's plan to contain him eroded under his initiative. Angela worked beside him, though nights she fell asleep at her desk. She filed paperwork, answered calls, managed logistics. She told him once, voice low, you're changing more than math. You're changing narrative. He nodded, but felt the weight of it. Back at Westwood, the atmosphere shifted. The board canceled reinstatement discussions. They redirected press inquiries, tried to regain footing. Parents, alumni, students pressed them for transparency. The forced apology and statement could no longer suffice. Some Westwood teachers quietly applied to teach at Hale STEM. Others met with him in private to share notes, resources, encouragement. Emily, still a student at Westwood, crossed the fence often, helping with labs, tutoring, bridging students between schools. Their bond deepened. The community rallied. City grants were released. Local foundations donated. Crowdfunding campaigns circulated. Students from disparate schools showed up in the halls. The building hummed with possibility. In one milestone moment, Kendrick Lowe flew in to speak at the launch gala. He stood before a raised stage, facing a crowd of students, parents, educators, and reporters. He said, I offered Jamarcus access to the world outside. But he chose to bring the world to his people. That is the courage of a true leader. The applause echoed in the evening air. Westwood, though once powerful, now watched from the sidelines. The narrative reversed. Instead of Westwood defining his trajectory, he defined his. Inside Westwood's classrooms, students whispered of Hale Institute. Teachers discussed it quietly. Some parents pulled their kids to enroll in its evening classes. The board tried to counter with after-school programs, but the momentum was gone. The trust broken. Jamarcus taught classes himself. He moved between rooms, writing on boards, explaining advanced proofs, mentoring, listening. In those halls he saw faces, some ashamed, some curious, some hopeful. Students who once sat silent, now discussed, questioned, designed. He felt alive in purpose. One evening, he sat in the lab with a girl named Talia. She hesitated, then raised her hand and proposed a twist in a proof. Others in the room gasped. Her method was creative, unexpected. He nodded and said, go ahead. The room leaned in. That moment mirrored his own first rise. The years passed. Hale STEM grew. Scholarships grew. Students were accepted into top universities under its banner. Jamarcus's name became a beacon, not of pity, but of possibility. He built something lasting. On the first anniversary of his decision not to fly, he visited Westwood's campus in the evening. The gates were quiet, benches empty, walls dark. He walked the courtyard alone. He thought of that moment at the airport. The text, the silhouette, the flight he refused. The ghosts of conflict hovered. But he felt no regret. He looked up at the stone facade, now battered by protest and scandal. He touched the steps. Once they were symbols of exclusion. now memories of struggle. He smiled quietly, then walked away. 1 year later, a new calculus student at Westwood faced the same twisted problem, and when she raised her hand, no one laughed. Instead, she glowed with confidence, choosing a different path than anyone expected. The classroom was almost identical. Same beige walls, same fluorescent lights, same whiteboard worn smooth by years of erasing. The desks had been replaced recently, but the arrangement was unchanged. In the back row, a quiet girl named Talia Morgan sat with her hands clasped over her notebook. She was a junior, black, soft-spoken, brilliant, and she never volunteered in class. Until today. Mrs. Abrams, a newer faculty member brought in after Westwood's overhaul, stood at the front with an air of purpose. She clicked a marker against the board and presented the final challenge of the term, an integrative calculus problem. Complex, layered, containing an obscure twist, the kind of problem that had once made headlines. Some students exchanged knowing looks. A few glanced at the empty desk near the front. The one people said used to belong to Jamarcus Hale. The air thickened. Everyone knew what this problem symbolized. Talia looked down at her notebook. She'd seen the structure before. She'd studied it late at night in free prep sessions, taught by former Hale STEM students. She'd even watched a clip of Jamarcus's proof once, saved in a hidden YouTube link, passed around and whispered. Her heart raced. She wanted to raise her hand. She didn't want to be the next Jamarcus. She just wanted to be herself and be seen. Mrs. Abrams paced. Who wants to give it a shot? Silence. Then Talia raised her hand. The room didn't laugh. A boy near the front leaned back and whispered, "She's gonna kill it." Another girl nodded silently. Mrs. Abrams turned, a calm smile on her lips. "Talia, please, come up." The walk to the board was short, but for Talia, it stretched like a lifetime. She picked up the marker with trembling fingers. Her breath was shallow, but her mind was sharp. She didn't copy what she'd seen before. She reimagined the problem, added a dimension, brought in a boundary shift no one had tried. She narrated her thought process, just loud enough to hear. No one interrupted her. No one rolled their eyes. As she wrote, confidence flowed into her limbs. This board wasn't hostile anymore. It was hers. The solution built itself line by line. Integrals, substitutions, simplification, boundary definitions, all aligned. Then pause. One final move. She clicked the marker closed. Mrs. Abrams walked up and studied it. Her eyes lingered. Then she turned to the class. "This," she said, "is original work, and it's correct." There was no applause. There didn't need to be. The class breathed as one, and in that breath was something powerful: respect. Talia turned to face her classmates. Some smiled, some nodded. No one laughed. She walked back to her seat. Her fingers still trembled, but her spine was straight. That evening, Talia walked home and stopped outside the Hale STEM Institute. Its logo glowed quietly in the twilight. Through the windows, students hunched over keyboards and whiteboards. She walked in. Inside, Jamarcus sat near the back, reviewing lesson plans. He looked up. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked. She blinked. "How did you?" He smiled. "That board has a hum. You can hear it when someone finally commands it." She grinned. "I think I heard it." He handed her a small card. "You're ready for whatever comes next." Talia nodded. They didn't laugh. "Because you stood in a room I had to fight to exist in," he said. "You walked through a door we built together." She looked at him. "You changed everything." He looked away, eyes glassy. "No. We did." Across town at Westwood, a new plaque had been placed on the wall, in recognition of students who rose above silence to teach us all what it means to think freely. No name, just legacy. Parents who once hesitated now enrolled their children in the Hale STEM summer program. Teachers used case studies from Jamarcus's trial as part of ethics training. National policy groups cited his experience in academic equity roundtables. Universities rebuilt their pipeline programs. The scandal faded, but the movement remained. In a podcast interview, Kendrick Lowe once said, "Jamarcus didn't break the system. He recoded it." And in every small classroom where a black student now raises their hand without fear, his fingerprint lingers. In that quiet chalk line on the whiteboard, drawn by Talia without shaking, was a message that echoed louder than protest. "We are not a mistake. We are the method." They silenced him because they feared what he could prove. But truth doesn't stay quiet forever. If this story hit you where it hurts, type yes. If you believe in justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.